Afrocentricity by Molefi K Asante, 1992, 5th edition. Acknowledgements. Every book is autobiographical. This one is no exception, inasmuch as the influences which have made this book have occurred in many parts of the world and have come through many people. I am most indebted to Karaimu Welsh, choreographer, poet, and writer, who spent many hours listening and debating these ideas with me. Indeed, many of her ideas have found their way into this book without any specific reference. To her and all sisters who learn from her consciousness of victory, I say, Mi da ase. Literally, this thank you means in Twi, I will lie at your feet. Forward. The need for an Afrocentric philosophy is so great that it is impossible for me not to insist on every black person reading this book. Historically, it is without precedent, combining the elements of philosophy, science, history, and mythology to give us the clearest perspective on that peculiar and particular group of people called the African American. The question most often encountered is why? Why the need for an Afrocentric philosophy? Why should Africa be at the center? And my question is why not? Who else would you want to have at your center? Africa belongs to an African, or African American, or African Brazilian. It does not take away from the universality or humanity of man to have a particular culture or history to stand as one center, since all cultures share certain universal traits, but they do not necessarily resemble each other. Afrocentricity resembles the black man, speaks to him, looks like him, and wants for him what he wants for himself. Dr. Asante's book on Afrocentricity is the next step in a victorious consciousness. It is an answer to the intellectual black who wants to know why and analyze. It is the answer to the pragmatic black who wants to know where is the ritual and the support system and whose God will I be worshiping. It gives the answer to the man and woman, the twin spirits of yester centuries, Isis and Osiris, Mawu and Lisa, that we must quickly return to our centers for peace in our families. Like David Walker, Nat Turner, Marcus Garvey, Elijah Muhammad, Molefi K Asante is a visionary and revolutionary in his thought. Like Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, Edward Blyden, and Malcolm X, Molefi K Asante is articulate and resolute in his belief. Like Karenga, Madubuti, Baraka, Asante is a living poet, still talking after everyone has shut up. But like no one else, Dr. Asante has fused a scientific notion, the bicameral mind, with the spirit, God force, with the historical, Africa, and the present, technicultural African American, to formulate a philosophy that allows for questions and analysis and provides answers and actualization. Afrocentricity leaves no one out. Neha clearly speaks to the brother and sister who have read Siddhartha, Gibran, I Ching, Bhagavad Gita, and said beautiful, but where is the book that reflects me? It is that time when we must recognize all that has gone before us and all that is to come upon us. The time that is here is to be used with wisdom and foresight. Afrocentricity will aid us on the path to our center and challenge the next generation to further scholarship and spirituality. The eyes of the world are on the African American. The eyes of the African American must be on his own center, one that reflects and resembles him and speaks to him in his own language. These are imperatives that the African Americans must address. These are the issues that Molefi K Asante has confronted and has come out looking quite like himself and 100 million of us strong here in the diaspora. It is pleasing to see one's reflection magnified 100 million times, saying the right think, knowing the right way, and praising the right God. Afrocentricity is pro-African and consistent in its beliefs that technology belongs to the world. Afrocentricity is African genius and African values created, reconstructed, and derived from our history and experiences in our best interests. If one understands properly African history, an assumption can never be made that Afrocentricity is a back to anything movement. It is an uncovering of one's true self. It is the pinpointing of one's center. And it is the clarity and focus through which black people must see the world in order to escalate. Maintenance and survival are no longer adequate terminology to pass on to the next generation. Our presence in the future is undisputed, but maintenance nor survival will ensure our propriety or prominence. Afrocentricity is a concern for some, a possibility for others, and an imperative for the Africans of the world. There is a Hosa saying that once one has had a vision, he cannot return it. Dr. Asante has had the vision and delivered the mandate. All of us who share in this vision can no longer ignore or turn our backs on it. Our center has always been there. It is our reality that is in question, and once we accept that our center is the only reality, then we can have the consciousness of victory that is so necessary to be the victor. Karayamu Welsh. Preface. Afrocentricity is presented here in a revised and enlarged third edition. Since it first appeared in 1980, it has been revised to incorporate more Pan-African examples. However, the book emerges from the experiences of African Americans and therefore finds most of its examples from that history. The centrality of the classical African civilizations in African Reconstruction has been underscored by the work of the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilization. After the publication of Afrocentricity, ACCAC came into existence as the brainchild of Jacob Carruthers and Maulana Karenga, who believed that the centerpiece of Afrocentric theory was a reconnection, in our minds, of Egypt to Africa. ASCAC's development is integral to the assertive challenge Afrocentricity makes to non-African and anti-African perspectives, because the association is committed to a historiography that rewrites Africans to the classical periods. The late Senegalese activist scientist Cheikh Anta Diop is the most prominent figure in this movement for the anteriority of Egypt. The renaming of the University of Dakar as Université de Cheikh Anta Diop is a principled Afrocentric statement that represents honor to the profound influence Diop had on African scholars. Cheikh, as some of us often called him, had proteges, students, and disciples both inside and outside of Senegal. Habib Sy, the Afrocentric communicationist, and Diao Ba, the Afrocentric physicist, represent in their own research interest the great range of Diop's scholarship. Afrocentricity as philosophy claims Cheikh Anta Diop as one of its earliest pioneers because he reconstructed African cultural theory with Africa as subject. Beyond his detailed descriptions and analysis of African societies and languages, he showed that Europe and Asia were but junior variations on the original African theme in philosophy and science. He embodied Afrocentric scholarship. Sheikh was able to publish his earlier works because of the creativity of Alioune Diop, the founder of Présence Africaine. And now the torch is passed. Each generation sees a little more through the cocoon, and each generation reclaims a little more of the history and culture. The marks of the truly Afrocentric personality are intelligence and boldness. One without the other is mere showmanship. Intelligence manifested in an acute awareness of self, perception of others, and the universe from an Afrocentric perspective is a motivator, but it is not enough by itself. With boldness, which is not cockiness or aggression, but Afrocentric assertion, intelligence becomes intellectual activism. To assert without intelligence is force, but it is never seen as power until it is coupled with intelligence. The generation's battle cry is no different from that of previous generations. The aim and the spirit are the same. We walk the way of a new level of freedom. We seek to no longer be victimized by others as to our place in the center of world history. We do this not because of arrogance, but because it is necessary to place Africa at the center of our existential reality. Else we will remain detached, isolated, and spiritually lonely people in societies which constantly bombard us with anti-Africa rhetoric and symbols, sometimes from Africans themselves who have been trained by the enemies of Africa. Chapter 1: The Essential Grounds. Perspective. This book offers a philosophical inquiry into the future of the Afrocentric perspective and a testament of Nia, the ideology of victorious thought. Afrocentricity is the centerpiece of human regeneration, to the degree that it is incorporated into the lives of the millions of Africans on the continent and in the diaspora. It will become revolutionary. It is purposeful, giving a true sense of destiny based upon the facts of history and experience. The psychology of the African without Afrocentricity has become a matter of great concern. Instead of looking out from one's own center, the non-Afrocentric person operates in a manner that is negatively predictable. The person's images, symbols, lifestyles, and manners are contradictory, and thereby destructive to personal and collective growth and development. Unable to call upon the power of ancestors because one does not know them, without an ideology of heritage because one does not respect one's own prophets. The person is like an ant trying to move a large piece of garbage only to find that it will not move. It takes no great gift to be able to identify the symbols which will, in their completeness, transform the whole of the African world and necessarily influence European and Asian thought. No longer are we looking whitely through a tunnel lit with artificial beams of Europe. We now are able to experience the Afrocentricity that the great prophets Garvey, Dubois, Fanon, Nkrumah, Muhammad, Malcolm, and Karenga had predicted for us. Afrocentricity takes a simulsense form. Once it is a fact in one's life, it is not linear, cannot be analyzed in a single line, and is inherently circular. I speak of it as a transforming agent in which all things that were old become new, and a transformation of attitudes, beliefs, values, and behavior results. It becomes everywhere sensed and is everywhere present. A new reality is invoked. A new vision is introduced. In fact, it is the first and only reality for African people. It is simply rediscovery. Our eyes become new, or rather what we see becomes clearer. There is first suggested the existence of an African cultural system, then the juxtaposition of African and American ways, and finally the values derived from the African American experience. In a very positive sense, we have the range of African American definitions and values within this statement, and it becomes necessary to explore the manifestations of our cultural values, both in their contemporaneity and potentiality. Unquestionably, on the continent, our cultural system is manifested in diverse ways as it is in the diaspora. We have one African cultural system manifested in diversities. Nevertheless, to speak of the Arab of Algeria as my brother is quite different from speaking so of the African Brazilian, Cuban, or Nigerian. We respond to the same rhythms of the universe, the same cosmological sensibilities, the same general historical reality as the African descended people. Indeed, Shango, Ogun, Oshun, and Obatala have meaning for us even if it is only at the essential level of symbol. All African people participate in the African cultural system, although it is modified according to specific histories and nations. In this way, we know that Yoruba, Asante, Wolof, Ove, Nuba, and African Americans possess values and beliefs derived from their own particular histories, yet conforming to the African cultural system. All cultural systems are responsive to the environment. Ours is no different, but it is better for us because it is derived from our own historical experiences while maintaining fidelity in its best form to the African cultural system. Asante, 1987. Adoption of Islam is as contradictory to the diasporan Afrocentricity as Christianity has been. Christianity has been dealt with admirably by other writers, notably Karenga, but Islam within the African American community has yet to come under Afrocentric scrutiny. Understand that this oversight is due more to a sympathetic audience than it is to the perfection of Islam for African Americans. While the Nation of Islam under the leadership of Elijah Muhammad was a transitional nationalist movement, the present emphasis of Islam in America is more cultural and religious. This is a serious and perhaps tragic mistake, because apart from its historical contradictions, there exist monumental contradictions in its application. All religions rise out of the deification of someone's nationalism. Understand this, and you will discern the key to our own victory. Afrocentrists understand and appreciate the transforming power of Islam and indeed recognize that same power within Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Marxism. It is no mystery, in fact. It is predictable that there should be transforming and energizing force in all religions. Islam has no distinction except in the specific history which has been deified. How has it been deified for the world? What are its assumptions and parameters, whose history and culture are held up as the standard? What are the forces at work within the religion? Putting these questions already causes you to contemplate the extent of the deification of the history. Islam as an organized religion had its origin in the Arabian desert, somewhere in the vicinity of Mecca and Medina, depending upon where one wants to place the emphasis of Muhammad's life. Without begging the question, by asserting that Islam is older than Muhammad, consider that such a posture has been taken by all religions when assailed for having a place in time or origin. Buddhists will say that Buddhism existed before Gautama. Christians will say that Christianity existed before Jesus, and Jews will say that Judaism existed before Moses. This is all true because the elements which are necessary for effective human living and collective group consciousness existed before any of these individual people. By the same token, Afrocentrists will say that Niger existed before Asante's Afrocentricity or Welsh's Mfundalai. They will be correct to assert such a position. Nevertheless, the truth of the matter is that the statement of the position must begin somewhere, in some place, with someone. Islam had such a beginning. In fact, as we know it, Islam began with Muhammad. Consequently, the initial responsibility and direction of Islam belonged to Muhammad, much as the initial responsibility of Naya belongs to its originators. The organization of Islam has been effective, not because of any more special relationship to God than any other people, but because of the genius of its early leaders. Consider the factors which have contributed to the overpowering submissiveness of Africans and other non-Arabs to the culture and religion of the Arabs. First, the language of God is said to be Arabic. Secondly, the pilgrimage must be made to Mecca. Thirdly, to pray effectively, one must turn his or her head toward Mecca. Fourthly, Muhammad is said to be the last and most important prophet. Fifthly, certain Arabizing customs are looked upon as valuable and significant, e.g., change of name to Arab name, Arab clothing, and female subordination, to name a few. Now let us consider why this is anathema to Afrocentrism and, like Christianity, makes us submit to a strange God. Arabic is neither more or less significant as a language than Yoruba, Kiswahili, or Ebonics. It is and should be more highly honored, however, by Arabs because it is their language. Did God or the bicameral mind speak to Muhammad in Arabic? Since Muhammad was an Arab, I would expect his God to have spoken to him in his language as my God speaks to me in Ebonics and Kiswahili. There is nothing more sacred about one language than another. One language may have special significance to one people more than to others. Understand how Islam made Arabic the language of millions of non-Arabs, thus spreading the culture in a most powerful manner. To read the Quran correctly, one had to do so in Arabic. This meant that those non-Arabs who wanted to become Islamic had to go many steps further than the native-born Arabs who already know the language of God. Look at the trip being run on his head. Unaware that God or the bicameral mind could speak to him, and probably did in his own language, the brother ran off to learn a foreign tongue. If your God cannot speak to you in your language, then he is not your God. Your God is the God who speaks to you in your language. What is your language? It is the language with which you first got your consciousness. Thus, for African Americans, this would be Ebonics, the language of Black Americans. For Yoruba, the language would be Yoruba. And for Asante, the language would be Twi. If you want to hear your God in the language of your ancestors, then learn an African language like Kiswahili or Yoruba. I implore you with every drop of blood in my veins to severely evaluate any and every idea that is contrary to your center. Learning and speaking Arabic to become more spiritual is way off center. Why do you suppose the religion of Islam made Mecca the place of the pilgrimage? I know that the Kaaba is there, but really what is the importance of the pilgrimage to Mecca? It is politically important. For an Eskimo, a Finn, an Argentinian, or a Japanese, the pilgrimage could be extremely harsh punishment. But for Arabs, the nature of Islam is to make it more difficult for non-Arabs, thereby securing their allegiance more strongly. Once a person has accepted the basic tenets and attempts to practice the religion as the Arabs, that person is in an unnatural situation because it was not meant for him. A journey to Mecca for the Arabs is natural. It is their sacred city, close to their populations and steeped in their culture. The African who makes the pilgrimage often flies over numerous sacred cities and sites of his own to march around someone's sacred stone. Afrocentrism teaches us to honor Jamestown, where the first bloods truly destined touched the American earth, to honor Thebes, the most sacred city, to honor Ashagobo, where the healing waters flow, to honor Lake Bosumtwi, where the god of Africa dwells, to honor the sacred spot where Nat Turner planned his revolt in Virginia. We have within our own history the most sacred and holiest places on the earth. Afrocentrism directs us to visit them and meditate on the power of our ancestors. Turning one's head to Mecca is symbolic of the same cultural insistence which keeps the convert looking in the direction of another's culture, not his own, since for the Afrocentric person, our God is everywhere present. This particular ritual is not understandable. Only in the sense of the Arabizing influence of the religion can it truly be understood. Do not get me wrong, it is one of the most powerful tools of mind control ever created. Suppose Afrocentrism had you and the white people of Europe and the Arabs of Arabia turning heads toward the sacred forest of Ashogbo or towards Tuskegee or Mount Kilimanjaro. We would have developed the instrument of collective will necessary for our victory. It is soon to some, although it will not come in terms of turning heads, it will emerge in the form of a collective consciousness capable of developing an international will and manifestation. Islam says that Muhammad is the last and most important prophet. That statement is correct if you understand it in the light of the deified history of the Arabs. Would the greatest nationalist who ever lived in Arabia not be considered the last and most important prophet? Understand this point. A nationalist is not necessarily a racist. Indeed, the true nationalist is never a racist. Muhammad was a nationalist who strove to bring about a cohesive spirit among his people, notwithstanding the fact that his teachings were accepted by some non-Arabs. This is the case with any perfected nationalist movement. It becomes universal after its acceptance by those to whom it came. Adherents will come from many different places, but the initial message of the nationalist is always to his people. If others want to accept such nationalist teachings, they can, so long as they adopt the behaviors, cultural habits, clothings, and lifestyles of the people from whom the words first emanated. This is why the Arabs say that Muhammad was the last and most important of the prophets. If another one comes, then he must be a false prophet. In addition, this assures the stability of the religion, the power of the movement, and the honored place of the founding and the final light of the national religion. Acceptance of the previous prophets is a necessary and practical action. However, such acceptance never honors the first more than the last. The most crippling effect of Islam as well as Christianity for us may well be the adoption of non-African customs and behaviors, such of which are in direct conflict with our traditional values. We out-Arab the Arabs, as we have out-Europeanized the Europeans from time to time. This is not so with the Afrocentrist. He or she studies every thought, action, behavior, and value, and if it cannot be found in our culture or in our history, it is dispensed with quickly. This is not done because we have something against someone else's culture. It is just not ours. We do not have too many complaints with the person who decides to accept someone else's culture, religion, or ideology, be it Islam, Christianity, or Marxism, if it serves him better than his own. However, for us, it is impossible to see how anything from outside ourselves can compare with what is in our history. We have a formidable history, replete with the voice of God, the ancestors, and the prophets. Our manner of dress, behavior, walk, talk, and values are intact and workable when we are Afrocentric. Our problems come when we lose sight of ourselves, accept false doctrines, false gods, mistaken notions of what is truly in our history, and assume an individualistic, anti-humanistic, and autocratic posture. Thus, we say if you must change your name, choose an African name, not an Arab name. Why go through the trouble of discarding a European name to choose an Arab one? Before the Arabs came in force into Africa with the jihads of 640 to 642 AD, few indigenous Africans had ever heard names like Muhammad, Yusuf, Karim, and Ali. These names came only with Islam. Let us be circumspect, and let us be certain before we make our moves. Nat Turner taught that the most valuable lesson is certainty, and we learned from his experience that you can never be too prepared. Up from the intellectual and spiritual pit which has held our mighty people, let every person take his post in the vanguard of this collective consciousness of Afrocentrism. Teach it, practice it, and victory will surely come as we carry out the Afrocentric mission to humanize the universe. Afrocentricity is the belief in the centrality of Africans in postmodern history. It is our history, our mythology, our creative motif, and our ethos exemplifying our collective will. On basis of our story, we build upon the work of our ancestors who gave signs toward our humanizing function. Niger teaches in quarter 4, verse 4, "You are meant to be a sign for the world." The songs, poems, stories, sermons, and the proverbs demonstrate our ancestors' inexorable movement toward the humanizing function, more fitted by a higher civilization, a peaceful agrarian mythology, and spiritual explorations. Our people affirm in the diaspora and on the continent the mission of spirit. Afrocentricity does not convert you by appealing to hatred or lust or greed or violence. As the highest, most conscious ideology, it makes its points, motivates its adherents, and captivates the cautious by the force of its truth. You are its ultimate test. You test its authenticity by incorporating it into your behavior. At the apex of your consciousness, it becomes your life because everything you do, it is. As I write on this paper with black ink on white paper, I recognize the ordering power, the civilizing ability, and the intelligence of the ancestors. Formlessness becomes form. Black spaces are filled with truth, and so we are like that in every aspect. This, of course, is a mythic reality, but the kind of mythic reality which dictates how Afrocentricity governs every moment of any life. The Christian will tell you that since they accepted Jesus, old things passed away and all things became new. What they meant is what I mean. A new perspective, a new approach, a new consciousness invades our behavior, and consequently, with Afrocentricity, you see the movies differently. You see other people differently. You read books differently. You see politicians differently. In fact, nothing is as it was before your consciousness. Your conversion to Afrocentricity becomes total as you read, listen, and talk with others who share the collective consciousness. It supersedes any other ideology because it is the proper sanctification of your own history. In a similar fashion to the Africans who are Christian or Muslim, the brothers and sisters who take on the habits and customs of ancient Hebrews are in search of a past that stares them in the face whenever they look in a mirror. You must always begin from where you are, that is, If you are Yoruba, begin with Yoruba history and mythology. If you are Kikuyu, begin with Kikuyu history and mythology. If you are African American, begin with African American history and mythology. Irrespective of present locations, the roots of all African people go back to East Africa, the cradle of human history. We do not find the Hebrews or those related to them until thousands of years after the ancient Egyptians, Africans, and Nubians, Africans, had appeared. If Moses were a Hebrew, he was one who appeared in history long after the dawn of human history. The African continent gave birth to Africans. This is our ultimate reality. During our reconstruction, we must not lose sight of our total Afrocentricity. It cannot develop further until we rid ourselves of all fantasies except those that grow out of our own history. Renunciation of Negroness and Western influences are to be highly praised, but renunciation of one slavery and the adoption of another must be declared an ideological deviation from Afrocentricity. The dispensing with symbols and scriptures which stand outside of us is a move toward national recovery.